Recording is on.
Okay, so we have another chapter here of the Ruby Developer Book Club. We're starting chapter 6 of Polished Ruby Programming, Formatting Code for Easy Reading. So this chapter is all about how we format code in Ruby. Um, and in this chapter, he's gonna go over um, the different considerations in formatting code, but he's not going to give a strong opinion one way or another. Ruby is flexible enough that uh, there are multiple ways to format code, and at least in this chapter, he's like, "Well, here's some approaches." And you can take your pick on which approach to take. This differs from previous books that we've read, uh, where we've seen that there's a lot more time dedicated to standardizing uh, different ways to format your code. So we'll start this chapter. So in this chapter, he's going to cover recognizing the different perspectives, learning how syntactic consistency affects maintainability, understanding the consequences of arbitrary limits, checking basic code formatting with Ruby, and realizing the actual importance of code formatting. Okay, so in this section, he's just giving examples of different ways where of different examples of code that do the same thing. Um, they are formatted in a different way, but they are syntactically they look a little bit different, but functionally they do the same thing. So bar if foo is the same as if foo bar. You can also choose to do foo and bar. Uh, this is also a different approach. Um, there are other similar examples where we have a return statement unless some condition is true. Similarly, unless some condition is true, then we return. And depending on which programming background you come from, like if you come from a different programming language, you may prefer one variation over a different variation. Um, so here he says Perl programmers might prefer this form of that code. Um, this section, and here in this section, he talks about the differences between uh, people he's going to call poets and people that he's going to call philosophers. Poets like the expressiveness of Ruby. They like the variability. They like all the different ways in which you can express yourself in Ruby. Philosophers are more prone to syntactic or semantic, or they find syntactic inconsistency problematic as well as semantic inconsistency, and they choose uh, to prioritize the consistency of code so that there are as few surprises as possible. Um, so this is something that in other languages you don't even need to talk about. Like if you're talking about Go is so simple and has such a limited set of keywords that often and limited syntax variability that often there's just a single clear way to express some logical thing in your code. Ruby is got a lot more keywords, got a lot more options for you, and so you have the choice of being expressive versus non-expressive versus some other language where you might not get that option. Okay. So here he's talking about how syntactic consistency affects maintainability. Um, so when you, as a single programmer, are maintaining your code, you wrote it, you understand it. Uh, it's very clear to you. When you have multiple programmers working on the same code, someone who is using a radically different style might throw off other developers on their team because they're uh, they're writing such different code that it's hard to parse, or it does surprising things, or it uses very mm, some edge cases of the language that aren't frequently encountered. So in here, he's basically advising that, like, um, strategies for teamwork, about figuring out how to find the balance between satisfying the poets and satisfying the philosophers. Um, so if a significant portion of the programmers lean one way or another, then it might give you a signal that those approaches might be that you might want to take that as those approaches as a team. Um, Otherwise, uh, you can start, like, enforcing syntactic consistency can increase performance of the philosophers. The poets may find such code boring and not as fun to work on, and it is likely that enforcing syntactic consistency will affect their enjoyment of working on the code. But it is unlikely that enforcing syntactic consistency will harm their productivity, as they are, in general, able to read and write a wide variety of styles. So basically, what it's saying is that um, enforcing consistency generally can increase performance of some team members and not harm the performance or the maintainability of the code. Um, so how do you know? So here he's talking about how do you figure out what kinds of developers you have on a team, and basically he's saying, one of the easiest ways is code review, and during code review, you have, let's say, bang condition. If not this condition, return. And if a programmer reviewing it requests this change, or you have this set of code here where it ends in an if, like you have an it's block, like a this is a spec guard, he's calling it, and it ends with an if, and a different reviewer requests changing it to the following, then you might have philosophers on the team, and enforcing syntactic consistency could increase the productivity. This These different styles are the styles that we saw in Eloquent Ruby, I think, where uh, it basically said, Ruby has the unless keyword, and you should use it, or you should prefer to use the unless keyword over the bang, for in most cases. Uh, okay, so one of the tools that we have in Ruby is Rubocop to support syntactic consistency. Um, so there's something here that isn't discussed. And that is that Ruby is a linter. So there, later on in the chapter, he's going to discuss a Ruby formatter. So Ruby comes with a formatter. It comes built in with a formatter. But Rubocop is linter. And the difference is that linters, well, formatters concern themselves with generally with checking for valid syntax and um, standardizing the white space in the text. But a linter will do more than that. So it has certain rules that it can follow. In this case, RuboCops calls those rules cops, and so those cops can enforce different different styles and different ways of structuring your code so that it can rewrite. Um, let's say you have the bang condition, and you have some cop saying, "Oh, we're never going to use that bang," then RuboCop can go ahead and restructure the code and rewrite it so that it takes the other format. That's not something that formatters usually concern themselves with, which is why we call RuboCop a linter. Um, this um, so there are newer languages that have enforced using uh, formatters like Go format or Rust format. They come built in with the language, and they basically say, "Okay, these are the best ways to format the code for this specific language." And what it means is that when you're starting to learn the language, you learn it in a particular style, and that is the style that basically you have a parser in your brain that basically has to parse the text and make create some semantic meaning for yourself while you're reading the code, so that you understand what's going on. And when you're starting to learn the language, it shapes what you expect to see. Ruby hasn't had this like such a formal standard for formatting. I know it comes with a formatter, but it's not the same as having it run every time you build your code in the ways that Go has it or Rust um, has standardized it. And so you have a lot of a lot of different styles in Ruby. Um, and in this chapter, it's basically saying there, there's not invalid styles out there. It's your preference, but it's basically preference that is built up over many years of looking at different types of code. So maybe it would help to look at what some of this RuboCop cops look like. So let's just go to double quotes. Okay, so here we're this cop supports. Let me make this text bigger. Um, so basically, you're you're gonna change. You're either gonna set the standard quote style as single quotes or double quotes. And for string literals, it's we in at least in this RuboCop to do, it's set up to false. So I believe um, when you hold on, let me test it out. Um, so uh, so when you set up a mm, so it looks
Well,
like
I suppose you could just change the rule and then run RuboCop on the command line, and it should find existing violations. I don't know if that'd be easier.
uh, let's just try. Oh, actually, there's a different rule that happened here where it saw that what I typed in wasn't used at all. And so what happened was that Rubocop automatically deleted those variables. And that's one of
Yeah,
the, yeah.
that's a rule where I always turn the autocomplete off. So it will fail the linter, but I don't allow it to not autocomplete, autocorrect. I turn the autocorrect off on that rule because it's really annoying. Because sometimes I'm in the middle of writing code and I haven't made use of a variable that I know I will need, and it just deletes it. So I actually turn autocorrection off for that rule.
Yeah, completely valid. I don't care. I'm in a weird case where like I'm a sole developer for at least the project that I was working on for 4 years. I was the sole developer, so I turned it off, and it rarely bugs me. So because I don't actually save the code until like uh, it's very easy to get it back, so I can undo and then put or whatever, use it in some other way, or comment it out until I'm ready to use it. It doesn't bother me as much, but it is personal preference.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
basically, like you can come in and turn the cops on and off. um, there is so you you can have Rubocop. You can use it in the command line to see what the failures are, or you can also set it up in your CI/CD pipeline so that it rejects commits that fail Rubocop in some way. Um, and those are things that like your team has to decide for themselves whether or not you want to enforce it like that. Okay, so I'm gonna
Yeah, I have some thoughts at some point. I don't know if I should share them now or if we want to.
yeah, just go ahead and share them now.
Sure. Yeah, one thought I had was with the auto correction feature of Rubocop. So I consider myself more on the poet end of the spectrum, but because Rubocop will auto correct whatever I type, it doesn't really bother me as much. So, well, it depends on the situation, but as long as I can type with double quotes, I don't care if it winds up being single quotes once the linter autocorrects it. So there's like that's kind of another reason to lean more on the philosophers than the poets if the auto completion is in play. Another thing that doesn't come up or doesn't seem like it comes up much is that the philosophers can disagree with one another, and this can result in large amounts of debate that is not helpful, or it's not helpful from a product point of view. And so sometimes I've worked on projects where you just have to enforce some style rule, no matter some pre-existing style guide, no matter what it is, which makes everybody equally unhappy, but at least no one's debating anymore. So
Yeah.
sometimes what you just have to do is take away the joy of writing code in Ruby just to stop people from debating syntactic things. So it really depends on the team, though. It's real sensitive to who's on the team. If you have like 3 philosophers and 1 poet, and the 3 philosophers have similar preferences, then there's no problem at all. You just enforce the preferences of the 3 philosophers, and the poet won't really care. But you do run into a problem if you have 3 philosophers that disagree and 1 poet. Now you have like whole meetings set up to figure out what the rules should be, and it starts to become like a context switching issue on the team. So it's an interesting concept and dynamic at play here.
Well, it sets up its a situation where Rails I think is one of the fastest single developer frameworks, and it's because Ruby, the language, is so expressive and so easy to use, and you can go really fast with it as a single developer. The moment you start adding people, it becomes a little bit harder because all of a sudden, you are using parts of the language that other people might not. You are having these conversations where it's like, well, I don't like that style. There are different way like there's it's harder to codify method signatures because you don't have a typed language. It's a dynamic language, and so a lot of times the thing you thought was clear in your head doesn't get it doesn't it's not clear in the code, and so another developer that expects a method to work one way will be surprised that they get nil errors, or something else happens in code that they're using. And so I think Ruby for larger teams starts to slow down, but for smaller teams, I mean it's pretty fast.
Yeah, another note I took. Oh, go ahead, Samuel.
Okay, sorry. I just wanted to share that maybe another perspective on using RuboCop. So early on, when I started to use RuboCop, first off, I don't really like automatically. For me, I like to be in control a little bit. So I turned off I didn't do the auto formatting. Sorry. And what my main reasoning at the time, other than being in control, was I wanted to get used to hops, like the rules, right? So I wanted to do them manually myself to know that, oh, it asked for this. So when I was in the terminal against my code, it will list out all the violations and I'll go fix them one by one manually instead of. So I think it helped me just get familiar with that kind of style, or the styles that Robocop enforces by default. So I wanted to share that as like maybe another way to approach using, or maybe just learning Ruby or something.
Yeah, RuboCop has taught me things when it has auto formatted my code. There, especially the ampersand whenever you're using like any of the array methods like map or filter, reduce, where instead of just explicitly calling a block, you can use the ampersand and pass it a symbol. Like I didn't RuboCop taught me that.
Yeah, makes sense. But how do you consistently catch that when it's auto formatting it for you?
Oh, I mean, like I save all the time, and it's pretty clear when what things have changed. Um,
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I just let except for where it's going to delete in progress code, like I mentioned before, which is unused variables and then also like empty blocks. I like to disable the auto completion of that stuff just for the annoyance that it causes me that I mentioned earlier. But otherwise, I prefer it to just auto complete stuff, and it doesn't bother me at all. So sometimes I'll even lean on it. Sometimes I'll type that first ampersand and then save the file and let RuboCop add an ampersand to everything in the whole chain for me. So I don't personally have an interest in going through and manually entering all of the ampersands if I know that RuboCop can add them for me. So yeah, I love the autocomplete feature, just as long as it doesn't delete stuff while I'm in the middle of working on it. But yeah.
I mean, it happens to me, but it's so fast to undo that it doesn't matter to me.
Well, sometimes what happens to me is I'll put something in a local variable and then set a breakpoint after it, and I'll switch over to the debugger. I'll hit my breakpoint, and the variable I stored an expression in is gone. It's like, oh crap! I guess I could copy paste the expression over, but it's just it's probably just a complete difference in workflow or whatever. There's definitely reasons or situations where I don't really want to hit Control Z to undo it because it might be too late. Like if I'm on a breakpoint in
yeah.
a debugger. Yeah.
So I don't use Control Z. I'm on Vim, so it's a U, and it's a single key, so it's really fast to undo.
Yeah, I do that when I'm editing single files, and I also have a Vim mode in my IDE, which I switch over to sometimes. But yeah, it's more just the context switch of trying to get the expression back. And in particular, what I'll wind up having to do is I'll store it in a global variable and then switch back over to the debugger so that RuboCop won't delete it. So it's just, yeah, it's probably just a complete difference in workflow and preferences and stuff. I do have a note here that I wanted to share, which is that sometimes for me, a choice is related to how it's going to impact my ability or the IDE's ability to make sense of the code. So I tend to not like stylistic changes that are going to cause me to have to grep using a much more complicated regular expression to find what I'm looking for. So if that's happening, I might start to tend to prefer a certain consistent approach so that I can grep for one approach as opposed to multiple approaches. So that happens to me sometimes. And then also sometimes if I go with a certain approach, the IDE itself will start to get confused and won't be able to like jump to all the usages or find the declaration or something like that. So how the tooling reacts to the formatting, which is probably very sensitive to exactly which tools you're using, starts to actually influence what style I start preferring. So it's a weird, complicated thing that takes time, like. So that was something I noticed wasn't mentioned in the chapter, that the tools themselves and how you interact with the tools is going to start shaping your formatting preferences. And since everyone uses different tools, there's actually an influence there.
Yeah, that's a good thought that I hadn't had before. That's interesting.
Yeah, for example, I was kind of slow to abandon hash rockets back in the day because I didn't like having to search for symbols with the colon at the beginning and the end. I liked being able to just search for a symbol with the colon at the beginning and not need to use a regular expression to search for both. But I've gotten used to that. And now I avoid hash rockets. But that was an example where I probably didn't adopt hash rockets for maybe the 1.9 hash format. I avoided it for maybe like 5 years or so until it was so prevalent and pervasive that it was now more like the annoyance I was avoiding by using hash rockets when searching was starting to get outweighed by the annoyances of the formatting being out of sync with the current preferences of the community. So then I switched away from hash rockets at that point. But yeah, like I immediately liked the 1.9 syntax better, but because it had a negative impact on my ability to search the code, I had it autocorrect. So I would write using the 1.9 syntax because I preferred it, and then it would autocorrect to hash rockets so I could search better. But now I don't do that anymore. I've abandoned hash rockets.
Do you have a fuzzy search engine in your?
I do, but it can match too much stuff. So if in the case where I know I'm looking for a symbol, I don't want to get like method names that have the same word in it. So that wasn't a good enough solution. But I do have fuzzy searching, which I do use. I hit like shift twice to get a fuzzy search. But if it's like a common, like if it's like the symbol, I don't know. I don't know what, I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but if the name of the symbol happens to also appear in a lot of variable and method names, then it winds up, the fuzzy search winds up not being helpful in that case because it's just too many hits.
Oh, sorry. Do you use RubyMine?
Yeah, I'm using RubyMine at the moment. Yeah. I've also used other IDEs as well, but yeah.
Okay. When you said the double shift to fuzzy search as well.
Yeah, that's the way it's done. I forgot what it was, and I was using VS Code before, and it has the same idea, but I forgot what the thing was.
Don't remember either.
Okay. Should I go on to the next section here?
I guess I could share one real last quick thought that I thought was sort of important, which was that I'm a little more like I'm unlikely to make a big deal in a code review about implementation, but I am more likely to call out inconsistencies in interface that I see, and I don't think the chapter mentioned that. But if I see inconsistent behavior in the public interface itself, I'm likely to call that out, but I'm not likely to call out, like if you do unless over 3 lines versus 1 line in implementation, I'm not going to call that out in a pull request. But if your public interface method doesn't follow, like introduces a new pattern into the public interface, then I probably will push back and say, hey, can we follow the existing pattern in the public interface? So I have a difference of, I'm more, whether we're talking about public interface or implementation detail has a big impact in whether I care about consistency or not. And I don't think that was mentioned in the chapter. So I took a note of that.
One of the other things that I thought in earlier, where he's talking about how to thread the line between philosophers and poets, and this whole code review process, was that, like, there's philosophies of coding practice called extreme programming, in which you practice pair programming all the time. And I have worked on a team that did pair programming, and what it does is, basically, whenever you encounter some when you're starting out uh, a story, or some piece of work, you basically negotiate with your pair partner about, like, okay, what things are we going to have happen here? Okay, we're this needs to happen, then this needs to happen, then this needs to happen. And then one person will be thinking through all the edge cases, and the other person will be typing. Well, I found that a lot of times when one person is typing, they'll type something that I didn't recognize. Like, I know what the code is doing, and then I'll have to ask them, "Hey, what is this syntax? Like, I've never seen this before." And in that moment, it is a learning opportunity where now, instead of being confused by the code, all of a sudden I'm growing as a developer, because I'm learning all these things that I wasn't aware of before. And it's we didn't have any coding review, because pair programming is your coding review. And so that helped bridge the divide between programmers of different programming styles. And it also grew us as developers, where we learned as because two different people are not going to have this exact same knowledge, and you're always going to learn from somebody else, even if they have fewer years of experience. You're going to have to they might know some things that you don't. So that's a different way of approaching bridging the divide between coders of different styles.
Yeah, definitely. I've discovered useful tools by just pairing with interns. So totally, without a doubt, pairing is a great way to get exposed to new tools and new approaches and stuff.
Cool.
Okay, so we were here. Anybody else have anything else to say before I move on?
I'm good.
Okay.
I don't think so. No.
Okay, understanding the consequences of using arbitrary limits. So one major issue with RuboCop's default configuration is that enables all cops related to metrics. So classes longer than 100 lines, modules longer than 100 lines, methods longer than 10 lines. So all of these things are things that I've heard before from like Sandy Metz, and other people who are advocating for different standards, coding standards, to make things more approachable. Generally, those people, when they they speak about these things in interviews. They're like, well, those are general guidelines. That's the starting point. Those are good defaults, but it's not. You have to. More important than learning that methods should be no longer than 10 lines is when to break those guidelines. And so you have to know, like, okay, well, there's certain times when I use this, and certain indicators that tell me when not to use them. The problem here is that RuboCop's default configuration basically doesn't have that consideration of, hey, sometimes it's okay to break these rules or guidelines. Sometimes it's okay to have methods longer than 10 lines if the abstraction is going to be a lot more confusing, or cause performance issues, or is just generally not good for this use case. Then this is not a good default, or a good measure. And there's something called Goodhart's law that I'm gonna hold on. Let me see if I can move this over. Any metric that becomes a target becomes a worthless metric, encapsulates Goodhart's law, which states that a measure's usefulness diminishes when it is optimized for rather than the underlying goal it represents. When metrics become targets, people and systems naturally find ways to game the system, leading to unintended consequences, a decline in overall quality, and a departure from the true objective. So I'm reminded of a story here of it's Apple. This was in the earlier days of Apple, when they started to grow, and you had these managers come in who may not have come up through the same ranks as the founders, and they started implementing things like, well, we're gonna see. You have to write a certain number of lines of code. So the number of lines of code became the metric, and we're gonna measure the lines of code, and you have to come above a certain number. And one of the developers was irked by this, and so he decided to do a lot of refactoring. And so he started to pull in his weekly lines of code, when he would write it down, were negative 5,000 lines of code. And they quickly got rid of that metric. And any if you rely on the metrics, the metrics might mislead you and actually cause you harm. Okay. So here in this chapter, basically, the recommendation is to disable this default configuration, these default recommendations, so that you don't end up fighting about them and wasting your time, and basically just come up with your own standards for how long things should be, and when to abstract things into different methods, or different classes, or different modules. Yeah, enforcing these limits will always result in worse code, not better code. Yeah, I mean, here, this is this example is a method that is doing a lot of iterations on all these combinations. The point is basically that you could abstract out the X and Y iteration of this, but does that help anything? Maybe if you're going to reuse it somewhere else, then maybe you should abstract it. But just abstracting it to get under the 10 lines of code requirement is misleading, and it's going to result in this abstract method that is only used by one other method, and it doesn't really clarify anything, and it doesn't help anything. So yeah. I'm forgetting what this section was about. Oh, this was about the number of the number of parameters, right, for these methods, and basically saying, okay, yeah, I mean there are guidelines that tell you not to exceed a certain number of parameters for each method, but again, like sometimes it just makes sense to have a large number of parameters, and in some cases you're advised to create an options object and then pass that options object into the method. But like, does that really help? Did that do anything good for you? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. It's not super clear, and just having the default options set up in your new CSV method might be the way to go.
I think it might even have been the first chapter of this book, but somewhere else in the book, he mentions that if you're going to introduce a class like this, or at least in this situation, that class should be somehow fitting or serving the actual problem domain, not being introduced arbitrarily for code reasons. And so whether or not the CSV options is a class or not should kind of depend more on whether it makes sense in the CSV domain to have an options class for one reason or another, but should probably not be guided by its impact on the number of arguments to a specific method. I can't remember where that was, but I feel like that was already covered somewhere in the book.
Yeah, and you put it in better words than I did, but yeah, it's good advice. Okay, here he's talking about how Ruby comes with a basic code checker formatter. It will catch things like unused variables. It will catch unused variables, unreachable code, mismatched and misleading indentation, unused literal expressions, duplicate keyword arguments, these and a few other things. The basic idea is that Ruby can check this for you, and the way to go about it is basically you type in Ruby -wc, and you end up getting the code checking for. W turns on verbose warnings, C turns on syntax checking mode, and so you'll get a verbose syntax checking for a given file. You can also type in some arbitrary code at the command line, so you can say Ruby WCE and then some arbitrary Ruby code if you want. But basically, I didn't know Ruby had a default formatter, and I think that's kind of a problem, right? Did you guys know that Ruby had a default formatter?
I had no idea, and I kind of would have liked it if the author had. I don't know if the author uses it themselves or not, but if the author uses it themselves, I'd be curious to know how they use it. I saw that he mentions a Ruby opt environment variable down below, which seems like if I were going to try to play with it, that's what I would do. But since I have RuboCop all set up and working, I guess I don't really have a lot of interest in using the built-in checker. But I had no idea until I read this that it existed either. So yeah. I didn't know about this at all. I don't know if it's new or if it's just always been there but not popular. I had no idea.
Yeah, I had no idea either.
And this section makes it so that I'm unlikely to even try it because it doesn't give me an obvious way to try it other than that Ruby opt environment variable. So yeah, I'm unlikely to even use it because I have a working alternative and it's not clear how to use it after reading this. So yeah, I didn't know.
Oh, I think you can just pass the flags when you call Ruby. So maybe add that in
But yeah,
uh,
the
CI.
problem there is like, what if I'm just running rake? Like if I run rake, what do I do? Does rake have the exact same flags? Like I'd have to figure all that out. Whereas I assume if I set Ruby opt, doesn't
True.
matter if I'm using Thor, rake, or like my own. What if I write my own bash file or not bash file? If I write my own Ruby script and then execute it with that bang user bin env Ruby approach, like will that take flags and pass them through to Ruby? Probably not. So that was why I was mentioning I would probably have to use it with Ruby opt because I'm rarely actually typing Ruby on the command line. I'm usually entering Ruby through some other means.
Yeah,
Same
true,
with like
true.
Rails. If I run like Rails C on the command line, does that take -WC? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But I don't know how to like, yeah, I just don't know how to use this actually.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. So it doesn't look like it's all that useful, and it probably doesn't do so much either. But I've not looked it up to see just how many corrections it can or warnings it can.
Yeah, I guess another challenge would be if there's some Rubocop rule or cop or whatever that I do like that the built-in parser doesn't handle, then I wouldn't be able. If I can't replace this, if I can't replace Rubocop with this, then it doesn't really help me to leverage it. It feels like.
Right. And that is a problem because, depending on your editor and how it's configured, if you have multiple formatters set up, well, which one runs first and which one runs second? And if you, uh, if you're expecting a Rubocop rule to be the last one run, then, how do you define that? And unless you, yeah, this is not a Rubocop replacement. And so therefore, like, yeah, I'm also wondering how I would use this in my workflow.
Yeah, true.
I will also say that SolarGraph is a language server that does some formatting. It has the ability to use Rubocop as its linter. And so, there's configurations for SolarGraph that you write in a configuration file, and it'll just say, oh, okay, use Rubocop for all these other things. Like SolarGraph provides a lot of features that Rubocop doesn't have, and that you can set up configuration for the two of them to work together in concert. And so that is a good option if you want to use a language server.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, this code, he playfully mirrored the code here. It's syntactically correct. It runs formatting for artistic effect. You should not format for artistic effect generally. You should focus on the understandability of your code and not the formatting.
Yeah,
Okay.
that
This one,
cracked me up. That
the
cracked
code
me up, but
run.
I don't know what that's supposed to be. It kind of reminds me of that rabbit thing from the original Legend of Zelda, but I don't know. Obviously, it's a palindrome of sorts on each line, but yeah, that did crack me up. Just kind of curious. Like, I've never heard or seen anyone doing that before.
I was kind of surprised that you said this runs because I didn't try to run it, but I didn't think that it would run.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it runs.
You might have to you would probably have to define some methods. Like you would have to define DNE, and I think you would have to define yeah, you would have to define P. So yeah, you would have to define some additional method. I think this probably couldn't run in isolation. Well, actually,
Yeah.
you know what? It could because you're not actually executing the method. So all that would happen is the method would get created but never call. You wouldn't be able to call this method, but you could define it. So yeah, that's interesting. I guess this would run. You just can't execute the method.
Interesting.
That is funny,
Okay,
though.
so yeah, I mean basically it sums it up by saying like, okay, there's a diverse group of formatting preferences. You should figure out where you lie on that spectrum. You should prefer, the understandability of your code over and formatting. Is important, but it's not the end goal of what you're doing. Okay, so I kind of wanted to talk about the a little bit about language servers and actually using some of this stuff in an editor.
I guess real quick, before we go into that, I did have like a quick thought on just like the metric stuff, which was, I think what happens is there is a correlation between those metrics and well-written code, but that correlation isn't tight enough, or my opinion is that correlation isn't tight enough to justify any sort of universal enforcement. And doing a universal enforcement is likely to make the code worse. If the code is already good, it's like guaranteed to make, or almost guaranteed to make it worse. If the code is bad, then it's a more interesting question. Then I don't know actually if enforcing the rules makes the code better or not. The author makes an argument that if the code is bad and it seems like the engineers wouldn't understand why it's bad, then they're not going to be able to decompose things in a useful way to get it below the limits anyway. That was like an interesting argument. I'd never heard that before. I don't necessarily know if I agree with that, but I think the mistake people make is I do think there's a correlation with these metrics, but that doesn't justify a dogmatic adherence to the metrics themselves, because then what's happening is you're being forced to make good code worse in certain scenarios. So yeah, I guess just kind of like a different perspective on what I agree with the author's conclusion, but I just kind of have a different way of thinking about it.
I think I agree with that argument because if I remember correct, it was an argument about if the developer is smart enough in the first place, and if they need such like arbitrary rules to be able to do anything useful. So if the developer is not smart enough, then how do you expect that they're smart to properly break up methods and classes? So I think it was countering that argument where that notion that I don't know, we need arbitrary guidelines to be able to do anything useful. So if we didn't know better, then how to break the methods up properly and classes too.
So I mean, for me, like it's such a there's so many other factors that are not considered here when you're or at least in this text about when to use one style over another. If I were on a greenfield project, I would have a lot more leeway to change the formatting than on some legacy piece of code. I think it would be a really bad idea to all of a sudden say, "Oh, there's a new formatting standard that I'm going to use for this legacy piece of code. I know it's existed for more than 10 years, and all of it is in this sort of format, but I'm going to change all of that." it's also you have other considerations might be like, hey, is it one developer, or is it a large team that is working on this, or are you working on something that is going to be like an API that's going to be like, are you going to be working on IP TCP IP network stack code that you're going to have to take a long time before you push anything out to the public, or are you going to be releasing like a web app that is competing with other things that have to get out the door very, very, very quickly? Um, it might require a different style and different goals for you to go by. And so, I mean, I can't tell you like what the right formatting would be. It depends on the project. It depends on the people. It depends on what the goals are.
Yeah, the priority or the goals and priority is an interesting one that's also not called out. There are situations where you might correctly identify that not only is this method over, over whatever number of lines. I guess here they have 10. Not only is it over 10 lines, but you've correctly identified that the method is too big by other means. It's confusing or causing maintenance issues, so on and so forth. Due to priority, the right thing could be to just write a to-do comment or create a story, a low priority story to break up the method, but leave it alone. Just because even though maybe the whole team agrees that breaking the method up would improve the code base, it could be that improving the code base isn't the right priority. So yeah, the prioritization is actually a big one that isn't mentioned, that I hadn't even thought of, but that's true.
Yeah, there's when you there I've heard in the philosophy of software design, the author talks about the different stages of a programming lifecycle. Where in the first stage, you're just experimenting with the code, and you basically say, I want to go fast, and I want to try a lot of small experiments. And because I want to go fast and do a lot of small experiments, I'm not going to write tests for all these things. I'm just going to experiment. And then in the second phase, you're like, okay, I've settled on a path forward, and I'm going to start writing tests now. And it's going to be a little bit slower. And I'm going to start writing code that is a little bit more maintainable. But guess what? We need users, and we need users fast. And the priority is getting features out the door. And once we have all those users, once we have paying customers who are providing us a lifeline for business to go forward, then in the last life cycle, it's paying off that technical debt and saying, okay, now that we have a little bit more time, a little bit more breathing room, we're not pushing out features as fast as possible. Let's make sure that we clean up our code so that if an opportunity presents itself, we as a company can pivot. Because if some other opportunity, let's say AI or some new thing comes out, and our code base is a mess and we can't understand it and we can't change it, then we're not going to be able to capitalize on that new opportunity. But in that third life cycle, we can start paying off our technical debt and preparing ourselves for our ability to capitalize on opportunities. That's what the books. I'm just summarizing what the book said.
There you go. I wanted to say something again about, because I was wondering at some point, what is the author's recommendation? Is it to is it to solve this by adding a linter like Rubocop, and then for Rubocop specifically,